oh, well, what about the Christian question? I know in one of your videos you spoke of maybe adding this ethno element to it, but obviously then the worry would be if you had this ethno hierarchy, which we're now a part of, does that lead down the same path of, the chosen people?
Their religion is a supremacist religion. They think the nations should all serve the God of Israel, and they should follow the Jewish people as their moral guidance.
Like, I'm talking about internally migrating somewhere. Like, would it be possible just to have one state, or migrating to somewhere like Ireland where it's not too overrun so far anyway?
We all now have kind of a common enemy. So that's the other side of it. And it's scary to even envision what that involves. The nature of Judaism. They're going to do what they've been trying to do for thousands of years, no matter what. The nature of this resurgent nationalism. The nature of Islam. The nature of the rise of China.
Right.
And all of that's just converging in the Middle East right now.
Eric, pleasure to have the chance to talk again.
Yeah, of course. Good to be back with you.
Yeah. And I was watching the talk you did yesterday. This is actually quite well timed because you're talking to the pagan gentleman. I draw a lot of blanks on the religion. There's still so many areas I don't quite fully understand about it. But I've watched a number of your videos now, and I was pleasantly surprised actually to hear your stance on Christianity. Since last speaking, I know there's so many people in this space which have such a bitterness against Zionists. And look, don't get me wrong, it's like granted completely. But because of that, they label Christianity as a Jewish conspiracy as well. And like almost every video I do now, I always have someone in the comments saying, oh, well, what about the Christian question? And it's like, look, I get it. We've all been through so many psyops now. It's kind of hard to know what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah. Right. Adam sent me his book. He's the leading proponent of this stuff. So far, I'm at page 30. Not convinced. It is a lot of sort of just so narrative. If you believe that there's a reality to prophecy, then the Old Testament does fit with the New Testament. Maybe not all of it. That's my stance, right? It fits with world events. If you don't believe it, if you take a cynical lens, then you can say, well, they're just fulfilling their own prophecies, or it's, creating this mass social expectation and directing history. It's more of a conspiracy. And none of that's really evidence for what happened back then or what the intention was. I also don't know how relevant the question even is of the intention of these things. We've inherited a world with a set of symbols, narratives, images that have this extreme potency. Now, what do we do with it? My tendency is always to synthesize and embrace and extract the good from everything, because I think there is good in everything. It's like many people would call me a white supremacist. I don't think that white people should rule over other people. I think all peoples should embrace their own identity. Everyone has good to them. Somalians, there are good things about their culture, I presume. I don't know them intimately, okay? But they can do that in Somalia, and that's fine. So that's my stance, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I do like is you are someone who's quite well read, and you are curious enough to at least look into different religions and whatever. So what made you pick Christianity over all others?
Well, yeah, the path there. So I had gotten into Hinduism because of the philosophical depth, right? So I started kind of from a modern scientism perspective, learning about quantum mechanics, learning about the multiverse hypotheses, grew up watching Science Channel documentaries, and that eventually led me to a set of arguments involving things like the simulation argument, the quantum immortality thought experiment. I basically pieced together a form of idealism from modern physics, and I'm not alone in that. There are many other contemporary philosophers who've arrived at basically a form of idealism through modern physical theories. And then from there, I started comparing the beliefs that I came to independently with the traditional teachings of Hinduism, which also believes in a many worlds. It's also idealistic. It also recognizes there's some kind of fundamental identity at the core of living beings. And I had, again, kind of arrived at that independently based on a sequence of arguments. So I started looking into Hinduism, reading the Upanishads. I started getting into comparative mythology more broadly, reading Joseph Campbell. I read Carl Jung at that time. And after kind of sitting with that for a couple years and thinking about it, I started practicing meditation. I started, doing what these systems actually prescribe. And in a state of meditation, it kind of occurred to me that I couldn't continue any sense of worship of a generic Brahman or one or divinity. It's just too remote from where I am. As a human, a limited human, you need some kind of mediator figure. In Hinduism, typically that's like Krishna or Rama, but I didn't grow up with these figures. I don't know the stories intimately. It's hard to relate to that. Whereas I did grow up with the narrative of Jesus, like Jesus, his miracles, etc., and the saving message. And I also resonate with the moral teachings very sincerely. So that's the figure that kind of came to me as this is the natural mediator. I had already met many philosophically literate Hindus, a lot of them white, in the Vedanta Center in Hollywood. That's where I was going, who regarded Jesus as one of the avatars. So it wasn't that much of a stretch for me to go ahead and make that leap, make that association. And then I started looking further into, the teachings of the Catholic Church. I practiced Catholic for a long time. As I got deeper into Platonism, I saw that the same kind of philosophical system that I was drawn to in Hinduism is there in Platonism, and in as robust, comprehensive a form. And Platonism is the philosophical foundation of traditional Christianity. So it's sort of like all the pieces were there that I was originally drawn to in Hinduism within Christianity, albeit in an unorthodox kind of Gnostic vein, and one that also addresses the so-called Christian question, because the Gnostics rejected the kind of profane historicist aspects of the Old Testament, seeing it as supremacist and power hungry, and they sublimate those narratives to have a spiritual significance. And then that is, pushed to mankind rather than like the literal political domination of a Jewish Messiah as the world king, which is kind of literally what the Old Testament pushes for and prophecies. So yeah, it just seemed like it addresses this question of the so-called deceptive elements in the Old Testament, kind of conspiratorial elements, resonates with the philosophical system that I naturally came to, resonates intuitively, morally. So all of those things basically lined up where it was the common sense thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when we last spoke, when you were saying you were a Platonist, and it really did dawn on me then I didn't know anything about Plato. Like, we all know that he's played such a big role into our civilization. We all know that he was incredibly smart, but beyond that, I didn't really know much. So since then, I started reading Republic, right?
Oh, great.
And like, for me, one of the reasons why I got into Christianity, I mean, obviously there's many reasons, but the big one, I just knew it played such a big role in our society. And I knew that this traditional approach, okay, it might not be perfect, but for one, it was successful. And two, most importantly, it was sustainable. Those alone are huge. And, when reading through the book, Plato talks about this idea of a noble lie. Like, let's say that I didn't even believe in God and I didn't even believe in Christianity, but the practical applications alone make Christianity, I think, so worth it for society.
Yeah, and in the laws, essentially, he advocates for propagandizing the people, just like he does in the Republic, but in a more kind of realistic way, propagandizing the people to accept certain premises about, ultimate reality, and just baking that into the culture. I think the Jews listened to Plato and ultimately built their society in the 2nd century BC when they actually had political independence during the Maccabean period. These were all Hellenistic Jews, very learned, obviously, in their own narratives, but also in Greek histories, Greek philosophy. They all read Plato. There were Jewish scholars of Plato and Jewish Middle Platonists that the later Neoplatonists will reference. So they, I think, took Plato's prescription seriously, instituted a society to reflect that. And I think that's why they're such a dominant force in the world, because they were the ones who actually did it. Other previous Platonists had ambitions of building the Republic. Okay, here's this idealistic ambition Plato lays out. Famously, Plato kind of failed to do that in his own lifetime. He went to Syracuse on the advice of his friend Dion, who was in the court of this king of Syracuse, Dionysius or something like that. Anyway, so he inherited a tyranny, but this younger son who recently came to power showed, at least to Dion, some kind of philosophical disposition and talent. So Plato goes there, he starts mentoring him, having long philosophical conversations. Ultimately, Plato naturally assumes too much of an authoritative position relative to this tyrant and offends the tyrant. He goes there a couple times. In one case, he is sold into slavery by this tyrant and ends up being bought by someone who recognizes him and then given his freedom again. So Plato's own ambitions of instituting his ideals did not work out. He thought it could be done basically through a tyrant that becomes a true king, or a brand new society with a lot of young people who aren't so kind of locked in to a particular way of thinking. So it didn't work out for Plato. Others have talked about, can we do it? I think the Jews did. And I think a lot of the Old Testament was written in that period according to Plato's prescriptions and according to the literary conventions of Greek history and constitutional writing as well. Russell Gmirkin has a couple of great books on this. And then the archaeological evidence is also stacking up on the side of Torah Judaism really only emerges in the 2nd century. Some of the narratives are certainly older. None of the texts are definitively older than the 2nd century. All the manuscripts are more recent. No attestation exists. No contemporary reference prior to the 2nd century BC. All you have are a couple inscriptions on jewelry and things like that indicate that some of the prayers of Judaism already existed. But then when you look at the archaeological evidence in Judea, in Elephantine Egypt, where there was a Judean colony, there's polytheism, arguably henotheism, like Yahweh exists, and he's clearly the dominant deity, but it's kind of like Zeus for the Greeks, who's also like god of storms and things like that. So, yeah, Plato is right about the noble lie, but I think it's important. It's not necessarily translated as lie. I think it's in book 5 of the Republic, where he's outlining like the training of the guardians, and the literal translation would be something like a noble thing. And he, in the Timaeus, talking about the Atlantis story, compares it to a Phoenician myth. So I think like the role of myth is a little more complex than just like a fiction devised to fool people. I think that's more or less like the way that some people interpret it, and there's a case to be made. But I think myth, I like Joseph Campbell, I like Carl Jung, myth deals with symbols that don't have the same kind of historical validity as propositional statements. You can't whole cloth fabricate a myth. You have to take existing symbols. Myths are by definition composed of these symbols. But storytellers, I mean, in oral traditions around the world, this is the way it goes. They take the same narrative, same characters, and they improv on them. They elaborate on them. And then eventually you get these big epics that become like the kind of foundation of civilizations, like the Iliad, Odyssey, or like the Vedas. Same thing probably happened. So that's the spirit that I think we need to take the noble lie in. We have symbols that have metaphysical potency. For Jung, a symbol is an image produced by the unconscious that intimates at a level of meaning the conscious mind does not yet have access to. Like, and I think you know this, that the unconscious is capable of arriving at insight because suddenly, you know, we have a flash of revelation and something makes sense. How could that happen unless there was a gradual buildup unconsciously? And, you know, famously, you have to sleep on certain things to really process them, right? The unconscious is doing a lot of work. And we know that just in ordinary life, the majority of our actual behavior is generated unconsciously. It's we're responding to subliminal perceptions. We don't consciously plan every motion when we're walking. Otherwise, we walk in a very awkward way. Most of what we're seeing, we're not consciously attending to. It's subliminal. It's sending us signals that we respond to unconsciously. So the unconscious is vast, far larger than the conscious mind. It operates on all time scales too. It operates on civilizational time scales. Collectively, it operates for individuals. So those symbols it's like the way that the unconscious presents to the rational mind. There's some insight here that you need to grasp. And we have the Christ symbol. We have the symbol of the Heavenly Father. We have the kingdom of heaven in the eschatological prophecies. You can take them as literal predictions, or you can take them as symbols indicating a kind of transformation of humanity, like a prophecy in some sense of a beyond human state, the overman state, or something like that. And yeah, I think if you just drop that and don't deal with it, you're out of the game of composing myth. You're out of the game of crafting noble, you know, quote unquote lies. And that's not really acceptable. You know, human beings aren't infinitely malleable. We can't just rationally design how we ought to live and live by it. There are deeper forces at work, and you have to be connected to tradition and history to do that.
Yeah. Yes, and it gives us all those things. And then not only just that, but like if we look at how society is formed, I mean, the church contributed massively to like the universities, infrastructure, everything. This all came from that, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, sure. Yeah. And partly that was because the church was the vehicle of classical learning. So at the end of the classical world, right before the Islamic conquests, Justinian shut down the pagan temples, the pagan academies, and essentially force converted all of those pagan Greek philosophers to Christianity. And it was the same institutions, though. And they had a curriculum that they devised. They had a canon of texts that they were used to using, that they preserved. And it wasn't all classical learning, but it was a distilled, simplified, like, here's how you teach the general paideia, right? Which is this notion of like a liberal, well-born man has to become cultured through, traditionally, it was being sent out and visiting a bunch of different teachers in different areas. And gradually over the course of antiquity, from 500 BC to 500 AD, they codified this process and institutionalized it. So, and that involved selecting certain texts, certain philosophical influences. It did synthesize, though. Neoplatonism synthesized Stoicism, Aristotelianism, and Platonism. So it's not like it's only Plato. They weren't just partisans for Plato. They also preserved all the knowledge of the ancient world. So, I mean, there are like Neoplatonic commentaries on Epictetus and Aristotle as well, especially the later Neoplatonists extensively commented on Aristotle. And that's what the early monasteries inherited. Those were the texts available because that's what the literate population had been using. So yeah, that developed over the next 4 centuries into the medieval university system. And it kind of followed a parallel track of development where initially the universities were just teachers. This time it was the teachers, not the students, who were itinerant, although there were itinerant teachers in antiquity as well. But they would go to Oxford or go to Paris and essentially rent space in this university that shared a large library. That was the actual infrastructure of the school. And then students would sign up for lectures from the various teachers who were on offer. And then over the subsequent 3 or 4 centuries, that solidified, and they developed their own curriculum centered on, of course, the quadrivium, the same curriculum that the ancient Pythagoreans invented thousands of years earlier. So a lot of it's the classical world, but also I think the moral setting of Christianity addresses a more fundamental cultural issue that was addressed in the Greek context just by organic cultural evolution because of the influences from surrounding civilizations, because of their relationship with literacy, them going through a dark ages and recovering. They ended up having the kind of culture, specifically in Miletus, where philosophy really originates in the Western Anatolian region. They develop a culture there where mass literacy is possible, experimentation and thought is possible. Christianity can take any group of people at any level of development and begin to pacify them and render them susceptible to philosophical thought. If you look at the very earliest church fathers, their writings kind of depict a context where the early Christian churches were places where the Holy Spirit was highly regarded, right? You can deny Christ and be forgiven, but you can't blaspheme the Holy Spirit. That was the central thing. When an itinerant teacher came to one of these early Christian churches, they were commanded to listen. So if someone claimed to speak from the Holy Spirit, you had to listen to them. Paul says, be ready with arguments to defend the faith. It's setting the cultural prescription, the pre-philosophical groundwork. You have to have this attitude. You have to have this kind of community before actual philosophy can even take place. You can't go to a tribe of savages who are going to chuck spears at you and teach them Plato. But if you teach them the Christian message first and create a Christian community, then actual philosophy can exist. And I think that's what it did in Northern Europe as well.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not just the learning side of things too. I mean, we look at modern life, more and more people have gone atheist or they've gone liberal, they've gone whatever. And it's like I said before, it's not sustainable. When you look at liberal families versus conservative families, the liberal side is soon going into extinction. Whereas conservative families, religious families, time and time again, they're the ones having the kids. They're the ones actually prolonging the culture. And, they always say that too, like once you start to deny the religion, you're attacking the root. And so liberalism it's almost rotting at its core. But so many people don't really look at the religion to see how much value it's actually given to society. Well, actually, so okay, we've covered like the good side of it, but I know you've also criticized it. There are faults within the church. So what are some of? Oh, and actually, this is quite a big one too, because obviously it should be said, and this is the thing I originally messaged you about, that Christianity has played a part in multiculturalism. It's played by having this colorblindness side to it, it's played this massive role in mass immigration. So obviously not just this, but what do you see the problems in Christianity, and maybe how would you fix that in the future?
Right. Well, I mean, there are many issues, obviously. Like I said, I think the Old Testament that we actually received was crafted by a Jewish intelligentsia in the 2nd century or maybe late 3rd century that wanted their religion to dominate the world. That, like what Adam Green accuses Christianity of being, Jews in the 2nd century clearly wanted, because that's what the texts reflect. And as long as that historical element is still there, as long as like the historical narratives of the Old Testament are taken seriously, and people don't adopt this attitude that some themes in the Old Testament are divinely inspired, but we shouldn't treat it like the literal word of God. If that doesn't happen, then people will naturally come back to the same kind of dispensationalist Protestant Christianity that now is producing Christian Zionism and supporting a war in Iran and things like that. You have to, well, the Catholic Church with its, replacement theology idea that the Christian church is the new Israel, that sort of addresses it, but even Catholics will hold the Jewish people ethnically in a certain regard. And we ought to have a certain respect. I mean, you really ought to try to convert Jews. You shouldn't accept the existence of, the Jewish people, because Judaism itself is anti-Christ. They're not accepting, by definition of being Jewish, they're not accepting, their actual Messiah, the figure that their own like prophetic projections ought to have been directed at. It's not what they had in mind, but it is what they and the world needed, ultimately. So you have to really be able to undermine the historicist interpretation of the Old Testament. You have to open it up to more of this kind of mythological mode of interpretation. And that's a really tough thing. I'm kind of debating in my mind sometimes the Adam Green approach of just throwing the whole thing out. Is that actually psychologically more saleable to people than taking the tack that I'm suggesting, where you like teach people to interpret in terms of comparative mythology and like Jungian archetypes and things like that? I think that works for an intelligent population. It probably doesn't work for an average person, a person of like 100 IQ. So what can you do then to change this relationship with the Old Testament? I mean, there's Gnosticism that has a certain approach to the Old Testament. That's also like black and white, but it's something that people can actually assimilate and adopt. Christianity clearly, by nature, rejects some aspects of the Old Testament. Like that's there at the beginning. Some Gnostics went all the way. Some Judaizers tried to totally reconcile Judaism with Christianity. The truth in there is somewhere along that spectrum, but the extremes are a lot easier for people to actually latch onto and believe. So it's really a conundrum. It's something, the best I can do is address in a scholarly way, how can we sort the good from the bad? The Gnostic writings attribute this quote to Jesus. I think it's in the Gospel of Thomas, where we have to be as good money changers, ciphering the good from, or the genuine from the counterfeit, rather. And if you apply that to the Old Testament, then that opens up another kind of Christianity. But it's not the Orthodox mainstream Christianity. It's not the Protestant Christianity. It's something more basic, something more open. But it's also something that, because there's no big authoritative institution saying how you're supposed to make this, call on the relationship to the Old Testament. It's just problematic. The New Age approach of there being no one big central authority and people believing different things and treating these symbols mythologically, that's almost like the natural way it ought to progress. That's sort of how early Christianity began proliferating these different sects before the mainstream church went in and laid down dogmas and laid down a concrete canon. So I think the natural tendency is to have a relationship like myth where different groups believe different things about the scriptures, united by the gospel message. In a way, the fact that there's so many denominations of Protestantism, it's showing that people do have this tendency, but at the core of it, all of them have the same canon of scriptures, and they're working off the same manuscripts that the mainstream church developed after the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So I think historical scholarship is the only way to bring to light that kind of primordial Christianity. I think the basic gospel message is naturally going to lead to a mythological relationship with the symbols. The canon, the Bible itself, like the specific scriptures in there and our attitude towards it, that will continually produce these kind of pernicious effects. Just like Islam. If you read the Quran, they're supposed to wage jihad against the those outside of the house of Islam, right? They are supposed to bring Islam to the world. And as long as the Quran exists and is taken seriously, that's what they're going to do. There's going to be reform and liberal Muslims who don't actually abide by the letter of the text, just like there will be reform Christians who drop some aspects of the Old Testament. Like your typical Methodist does not buy the idea that women shouldn't speak in church. You know, they have women pastors and it's clearly prohibited. Or they'll accept LGBT pastors, you know, things that are obviously not in line with the letter of the text. So some Christian denominations drop some aspects, but I guess what's really needed is the definitive answers here. Because we went away from a mythological relationship with the symbols and we locked it down into a particular historical narrative, that historical narrative has to be deconstructed and reinterpreted, and the historical truth has to come to light. The problem there is that there's just not that many sources. We can keep recycling the same arguments and analyses that have been going on for the last couple hundred years. The Gnostic texts open up some insight. You know, they've only existed, or we've only had them rather, for 70 years. They were found in the 1940s in Nag Hammadi. And there was such intensive censorship, too, in the ancient world. It's like people always say, you know, look how many manuscripts prove the existence of Jesus compared to other figures, like Socrates. There are far fewer manuscripts proving the existence of Socrates than Jesus. It's like, well, that's because the Christians came to power and censored all the non-Christian writings. So obviously those are the manuscripts that survived. And so, I mean, I don't know. People have made scientific progress on far less material than what we have regarding the first century. In some way, it's like Adam's approach is in the right direction. It's just his is very polemical. He's trying to uncover the truth, but he has his own hypothesis of what happened, where they constructed the figure of Jesus to fulfill these prophecies to effect a kind of world domination. That's his line, and he's looking for evidence to conform to that. And, you know, very often when you're generating a theory, you do have to have a hypothesis and be biased in favor of it so that you can find the relevant evidence. You can't just like look at all available evidence impartially and the theory naturally presents itself. So Adam has to take his tack, but then I also ought to take my perspective where the primordial Christianity was something closer to Gnosticism, was something closer to a simple gospel message, a relationship with basic symbols. It was something that was more easily integrated with Hellenistic thought and even, you know, pagan belief. And that's just really hard, and I don't have time to do it. And not many other people want to take that approach. It's just not, it's one of those issues where, like, what should happen, the incentives don't align for it to happen. And it's very unlikely, therefore, for it to happen. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know in one of your videos you spoke of maybe adding this ethno element to it, in the future. But obviously, then the worry would be if you had this ethno hierarchy, which we're now a part of, does that lead down the same path of the chosen people? Does that then lead to this kind of pride within that, and you start to feel superior? Is that how it started?
Right. Well, yeah, the ethnic component, the arguments are there in Catholicism and Orthodoxy that God creates the nations. Really, the problem with Christianity is that it was a lot of Jews living in a Greek world that converted, and now they were supposed to be in common community with Gentiles. So, like, ethnic mixing was baked into that context, specifically of the Jews who no longer had their ethno-religion, and their ethnicity kind of depended on that, at least the way that they had been conditioned to believe in it over the previous 2 centuries since the Maccabean Revolution. And what were they going to do? Like, they blended with the Greeks. There's no, Jewish Christian church like there is an Ethiopian Christian church, or there's like the Greek Orthodox Church. There's no Jewish Orthodox Christian church because all the early converts they mixed with other peoples. And so it's like you almost have to have this to make it workable, to make sense of the historical events. You have to look at the Jewish people as like the only non organic nation that God actually undid with Christianity, where like all the other nations God created, but the Jewish people only exist to give rise to the divine incarnation. And then once they do that, well, now they no longer have their own national existence. They're kind of sacrificed to the world and they don't exist. Now, Jews aren't going to like that, obviously. And many Christians would find that unpalatable and anti-Semitic. But there's not a lot of other good moves here just because of the history of the Christian community. I think the best we can really do that's saleable is the Catholic arguments from, you have loyalty to your parents, you have special obligations to your parents, therefore you have special obligations to your family, your extended family, your country. There is a role of your nation. And then you can point to the etymology of nation. It's not just an abstract political entity. It is actually from common birth, natio. And all of those arguments get used. And the conservative Christians out there are recycling those arguments. The problem is it's not as compelling when at the same time there are verses in the New Testament that seem to undermine the relevance of distinct ethnic identities. And the Old Testament too, where, like Abraham, is it Abraham or I forget which one of them, one of the ones who goes into Egypt, he marries like an Ethiopian woman. And someone objects to this and God strikes that person dead. So, and then there's other instances too, of race mixing in the Old Testament that's permitted. People will point to verses that oppose race mixing. The book of Ezra is like all about, we have to keep the basic, the ethnic stock of the Hebrews pure, essentially, because they were mixing too much. So the Bible, again, is kind of the issue where what we got was a canon of scriptures that's mixed. And unless we can sort the genuine from the counterfeit, that will always be a recurring issue. No amount of, Catholic philosophy or Orthodox tradition is going to undo the text of, Genesis. So it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, It is because we are just seeing in real time that mass migration, multiculturalism is just not working, and there's just so much evidence for this. Like so I wonder, when you're saying about these conservative Christians, there's kind of what you were touching on. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives has denied the faith. That was Timothy 5:8. So, like you were saying, we could argue that people are our kin, a nation. These are our relatives. These are the people we need to look after. Another one, Psalms 82, where it says, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy. Like look at the UK. Over 100,000 young girls have been raped by these Muslim Pakistani grooming gangs. Some even put the estimates to 1 million people, if not more. And
Right.
and we all know that the easy solution for that would be to have stronger borders.
But that same verse, people will
Hmm,
also read that and say that, well, these third world nations are far poorer and worse off, so we should charitably donate to the poorest to the greatest extent. If the poor shall inherit the earth, Africa is going to inherit the earth.
sure. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It just seems like one of those things where you try and save everyone at the same time. It's just going to end up with complete failure on all sides. It's better to grow these things out slowly rather than we just know trying to do everything at once is going to be failure.
Yeah, I mean that's what the philosophically minded person, the scientific sociologist would conclude. That's what logos points us to. But then you have these texts, these traditions, and even the Catholic Church will say that we do have an obligation to charitably contribute to the less fortunate in other countries. And basically the less fortunate they are, the more we have an obligation to help them. Once again, indicating that we ought to all give money to Africans. And their migration policy, like if migrants want to come into the country to seek a better life because they're facing sincere economic hardship in their homeland and they're willing to assimilate and regard the host culture, then the Catholic Church is basically for it. And there's all sorts of Catholic charities that have facilitated migration for that reason. Now, we can combat it as a half measure by saying, but these migrants don't have respect for the host countries. They're not assimilating, and therefore they have to go back.
Hmm.
But it's not sufficient because some of them will at least be able to fake the idea that they're assimilating. If they're seeing all of their cousins get kicked out of the country because they're, still wearing hijabs or whatever, then they'll just stop wearing hijabs. And that doesn't mean that their heart has changed. And even if it had, you would still have this issue where the basic stock and cultural foundation of the country would be dramatically altered. So, if you really tease it carefully, arguments within Catholicism can work, arguments within Orthodoxy can work. There's nothing in the Protestant world that I can see that is prepared to deal with this question. And so, once again, like, where does that leave us, and what can we do? As long as the Bible exists, as long as the heritage of mainstream Christianity exists, these philosophical maneuvers will always be footnotes to the text, and people will be able to cherry pick parts from the text that indicate, yes, we should donate to Africa. Yes, we should accept migrants.
Yeah, yeah. I what is Adam Green? Is he atheist? Is he?
Well, he was, I think, and then in a bunch of debates online, people kept objecting that, like, you're cutting down the Christian worldview, but you don't have a worldview to replace it with, and so it's like, how do you justify your own beliefs?
Right.
And so he kind of adopted a neo-pagan kind of perspective. Um, yeah, the paganism stuff, like, I have a respect for European indigenous religion. I studied Hinduism. I studied comparative mythology. I enjoy learning about different mythological systems and rituals and all of that. And the Neoplatonic perspective is people receive the particular names of the gods that they do, the particular rituals that they do, the ritual sites that they do, because of divine providence. And if you believe in a benevolent God, you ought to, that's the logical conclusion, that God gives people what they ought to receive. Now, by that same token, if their paganism is replaced by another faith, well, then that also, God is giving them what they need. And the lesson ought to be that the nature of myth, the nature of religion, dealing with symbols, is not historical propositional claims. It is another order of things where, somehow you can be right in worshiping Odin. And then when that's replaced by a worship of Christ, you're also right to worship Christ, because there's some common truth underlying both systems, and the evolution of the symbols reflects an evolving understanding of the nature of reality in a profound and genuine way, where both have to be true. Divine antinomy is a common property in theological systems where God contains paradox. Any first principle that genuinely encapsulates reality has to encapsulate all extremes. God can't just be the cause of heat. He has to be the cause of cold as well. And in some sense, you shouldn't say he's the cause of evil, but like evil has to arise from God's creation naturally. God has to contain both within himself. You can't have like a Manichaean, here's God and here's Satan, and they're the two primordial metaphysical forces in the world. That just doesn't work for philosophical reasons. So God will contain antinomy, will contain seeming contradictions that resolve because the level of reality that's actually being depicted isn't like material reality. In material reality, heat and cold can't subsist in the same place at the same time. And so if you're used to dealing with descriptions of mundane reality where matter is finite and limited and only one thing can be true, there can only be one historical truth about this event, not multiple, then when you deal with the level above physical reality, which isn't spatial, there aren't bodies occupying metaphysical space. There are archetypes and paradigms and forms occupying metaphysical space. And those can contain contradiction in one. Heat and like the principle of heat and the principle of cold are both there in the laws of thermodynamics, right? That law, that logos at a higher level, or nomos, at the level of the reason principles of nature, those can co-subsist in one and the same arche or principle. So you're going to see that manifested in the nature of symbols, where things seem contradictory because you're pointing to a principle that contains seemingly contradictory principle, just like heat and cold. In the source, in the form, in the paradigm, all of the antinomies are contained. And so when we look at these symbolic realities, we're going to see both sides. And it's sort of like the reality, or rather the elements that you pull out of your mythological regime have to be appropriate for your particular context, just like a physical system. Like, when does the math of like really hot systems manifest? Well, when the material circumstance is fit for it. And so we have a particular material circumstance. We have to be able to pull from that realm of myth the elements of law that actually fit our context and are actually needed. But to do that, you can't have the one dogmatic position that this is the historical truth, this is the one thing, because it's basically treating myth and symbol in a profane way. It's treating it like it obeys the laws of bodies and matter, where only one thing exists at one time, when what it's really about is a level higher than that. It's the metaphysical. But that's not something that you can teach ordinary people. They will not be able to grok that notion because they think in terms of physical reality. All there is physical reality. I've met relatively intelligent people who are convinced that God, like, we are created in the image of God because God is like a giant human and he literally sits on a throne. And these are people, like, they're functional, they pay taxes, they have jobs, they're like above 100 IQ.
Right.
So that's what you're dealing with, which means I think, again, the New Age approach, where there's not one monolithic authority, and we like have various teachers who are able to pull from that mythological realm what's necessary, that can tailor solutions according to the context, but that's also not very conducive to the existence of the nation state. So I guess the Orthodox approach of having a national church and having church leaders that care about your nation, that's sort of the only way. That's an argument for orthodoxy over Catholicism, I guess, because in Catholicism, the people deciding what's metaphysically true and false and what we ought to take and what we ought not to take, those people are committed to the global good necessarily. It's the Catholic universal church. Whereas the Orthodox Church, the local leaders, the local bishops, they can interpret what the law suggests for that nation at that time. But I mean, what are the odds that orthodoxy ascends and we have, you know, the Orthodox British Church or Orthodox American Church being like the monopolistic form of religion? It's just so unlikely. The Anglican Church could maybe do that, but they're very woke, you know? So,
Well, I still think, you know, religion will always trump someone who's atheist, and this is the sustainable path. Also, I want to talk about your return to the land a little bit too.
sure.
But yeah,
Setting all those problems aside, yeah, the benefits of religion somehow, despite all these issues, still outweigh the costs, because religious people have children, religious people
Right.
are well adjusted, they're happier. It's like just the basic psychological effects. I agree. But then at the same time, you kind of take this poison in with the cure because of these underlying problems that are just baked in.
that you kind of have to just ignore a little bit, otherwise you go insane. But yeah, it's one of them things. Kind of is never ending. Orthodoxy too. I mean, I don't know. It's still, I feel it's somewhat popular, and people kind of discount it, but there is a bit of a revival there.
Right. But, you know, the Orthodox Church too, they're not against race mixing, not like canonically. But I do know Orthodox priests who would discourage race mixing. And Orthodoxy is, you know, it's whatever the local bishops authorize, whatever they condone. It's a decentralized structure, which means in some contexts where like there are a bunch of white liberals, if they all adopt Orthodoxy, well, their Orthodoxy is just going to be another species of woke. So
Right. Well, actually, that's a perfect segue. I mean, two things I wanted to say was I do like how you allow for pagans into your community, because with the right in general, it does have an issue of just fracturing off into all these small little isolated communities. So yeah, it's really nice that you do allow for that. And you know, I think people get caught in the weeds a lot, and ultimately we're always going to agree on more than we disagree with, but we have that obsession with just focusing on those areas, right? So yeah, so I really like that. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, okay. So this is the area which I kind of get stuck with, and maybe you're the best person to ask, but obviously on the right, this is when people focus more on the heritage and the lineage as a way to determine your claim to the land. So in my head, when it comes to like race mixing, you know, someone who's half caste, they have a black dad and a British mum, or an American mum in your case, or vice versa. In my head, this person still has the lineage because at least one of their parents has the bloodline. And don't get me wrong, I've heard strong arguments against this, but I know you guys specifically, you want the bloodline where both parents are Anglo-Saxon, European, right? So how do you square that away, or like what is the reasons behind that?
well, I mean, we're a private club for people of European heritage who want to celebrate the European heritage. So it's as simple as that, really. It's not like we're a nation or a territory where there is that lineage that people can claim. yes, like Black Americans are heritage Americans. That's undeniable. They have a lineage here. But we're not a heritage American association. We're not the nation that we live in. We're a private club for people of a particular heritage. Um, and if someone is, half something else, then to be psychologically healthy, you really ought to embrace all aspects of your heritage because that's who you actually are. And we're not an association for people to embrace European, but also some South Asian heritage. We're an association for people who want to embrace and preserve the European heritage. So we rely on free association, on voluntary association. And I think that's a model that can be replicated everywhere. We could have RTTL communities in Argentina. We could have RTTL communities technically in India if we wanted to for people of European heritage, unless the country that we're in outlaws it. But I mean, there are communities like that of Indians in the US. There are communities like that of other groups, and they maintain their particular heritage. They don't care that much about the history of one particular piece of land. Now, in the UK, it's very different because you have this ancient history that's conspicuous, that's visible, it's constantly, it is your literal environment,
Right.
Whereas America, we have that in certain limited areas and people have those strong sentiments. But even then, like the areas where there's the most conspicuous legacy from our past, those are areas that have experienced the most demographic replacement, So essentially, the organic phase is that, yes, a nation grows out of a particular context, is embedded in that context, and is kind of inseparable, like blood and soil, right? But beyond that, another layer is creating the colony, where you go to a new territory, you carry forward a charter that represents the values of your previous homeland, and that's sort of what we're doing. We call the European common culture our heritage, because that's the level that we choose to identify. You could say you're coming from Anglo-Saxon Jutland, right? And you are a Ute. You could go to England and then choose to have like the Utish colony in England, or you could choose to have like the general Anglo-Saxon colony because you have more in common from your general like Northern Germanic homeland. So we can choose to have like the Norwegian association that's all about Norwegian heritage. And there are Norwegian heritage associations in the US. There are groups like that for different ethnicities. We can do that for the collective of all European ethnicities because there's enough common cultural groundwork. I would say arguably like Europe has as much in common as all of India does. India has so much diversity ethnically, linguistically, religiously, and yet they can have a common Indian heritage and that's no problem. I would bet actually that there is less genetic diversity in Europe as a whole than there is in just India. So, if it's by the same token, or if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, we should be able to have a European heritage that we count as our homeland. And that's where our values and principles of law originate. And then we can create colonies of that anywhere we want. And eventually those colonies, if successful, will develop their own local blood and soil elements. Just like the Afrikaners, they were a blend of ethnicities. They developed their own architecture, their own language. So any future RTTL community would be pan-European, and it would become something in its particular area, suited to the climate, suited to the, building materials and so forth. So it's like at the same time, less organic than just being British because you're born in Britain, but it's part of the same continuum. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like one thing we can't deny that there is a deliberate attack, and in all of the West, it promotes so heavily the idea of race mixing to the point where it's literally like, okay, this is being put on a little too thick. And well, especially Brits. I mean, we have had that land for over a millennia. We've formed our language. We've pre World War II, we were 99% ethnically white, and it's been that for the longest time. It's only within this small little space. I mean, you guys, what, like 1960? You were 95% white in the U.S.
Yeah, 90. There was a 10% black population, but
Not 10%. Right. So I mean, like it's been like this for the longest time, and you guys are just, offshoots from us, really. So it's only really, and a few other European countries, sure, but it's only these last 100 years really where we're seeing all of this being pushed on us so much. And like, I mean, the example a lot of people go to is in the UK we have this singer Bob Dylan. You know the guy?
say again.
Bob Dylan.
Villain?
He's like half black, half white, but he went viral. He was the guy doing "Death, Death to the ID," that chant.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think I know who you're talking about now. Yeah.
right. So his parents. He's got a white British mum and he's got a black dad. And he's at Glastonbury. He's British born, and he's saying he has this one song. He's like, "I heard you want your country back. Shut the fuck up." And it's literally like you were born and raised in England. You have the lineage and everything else. You are in such a privileged position to be at Glastonbury, one of the most premier stages we have, one of the most premier festivals we have, and you turn around and just shit all over the English culture. You shit all over the heritage, and you're obviously siding more with your black side. And it's literally like why would I want someone like that in my tribe? That being said, if someone was to fully embrace and they do have the heritage and lineage, I guess I would be willing to welcome them into my tribe. But like, how do you decipher that? And then I guess that's where it gets a bit muddy, and maybe that's why you've chose to just do it the way you have. I don't know.
Yeah, the issue is it's a matter of degree and intensity. So you could accept someone who's half black into your tribe, but could you accept like 30 people who are half black into your tribe if your tribe is 150 people? What's the size of your tribe, and how many people are coming in with alien heritage? Past a certain point, it's not going to be, regardless of how they as individuals identify, if you just replace a population of white British people with all Indians who claim to identify with British culture, they won't maintain British culture, because British culture comes from the nature of the British people. So you can tolerate a certain amount of admixture, and we're not absolutely hard line, where someone can have like a great grandparent that's Cherokee or whatever in some cases. Again, it's not like one hard line, here's the limit for us. But it does have to be preponderantly European heritage to be accepted. And that's just because we're a small community too. So if your tribe is only 40 people and you accept someone in who's half non-European, well, the genetic footprint of that will persist for generations, and the character of that people will be altered forever through a founder effect. If we were 1 million people, then like we could probably accept someone who's half Japanese once in a while. But it's just a matter, again, what is the nature of the population you're talking about, and how many people who don't share that heritage want to actually enter in and assimilate.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like you say, the larger that community gets, the more people are going to be drawn to that, and suddenly you've got a different culture altogether. It's just like with the Civnats. If you're looking at a country which is 100% one culture, and someone comes in, okay, naturally they're going to assimilate. If you now have a country which is like 50% British, 50% Muslim, well, it could go either way. So exactly. The Civnat argument makes no sense.
All of the Muslims could have come in with the honest intention of living up to British culture, values, and laws. But will their children, will their grandchildren? There's no guarantee of that. Because like you're thinking in terms of individual assimilation into a cultural, biological phenomenon that isn't individual. It is collective. It is intergenerational. So it's like there are plenty of people who immigrate to America who sincerely love America and want to be American, and then their kids hate America and perceive us as colonizers and all that.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, we have now just too many examples of this. We had 7/7 bombings in the UK, British-born Muslim. Oh man, I think Axel Rudakabana, you probably heard of. This was the guy who stabbed up all these kids. Yeah, it's one thing for the parents to come in and accept and be grateful for the culture, but then just all this propaganda is teaching them that, oh no, these guys are evil, these guys are colonizers, and all the rest of it. I just want to change topics slightly because we are kind of seeing this huge surge in nationalism, and I wanted to ask you, because you've been in this space for quite a while. I don't know if this is me being naive or anything, but seeing this big kind of uproar about it, it does kind of give me hope for the future. And I think, would you say you first got involved with this like 2016 when Trump was running?
No, I was already around before the alt-right, so before like 2014. My first few years online, I was exposed to these arguments and I interfaced with it. I made a video on race realism in like 2013. That was the first time I myself addressed it, but I was influenced by those arguments back then. I've always emphasized philosophy and more, I guess, academic content on my YouTube channel. But no, I was definitely in these circles from 2013, 2014.
So with what's going on now, we have Rupert Lowe, who's kind of had a bit of an ethno-nationalist stance, saying things like a British passport doesn't make you British. It seems like the things are changing a bit, but again, maybe it's just because I'm new to the scene. I'm not sure if this is normal or not, but would you say this feels the same as it did 10 years ago, or is this completely different?
No, not at all. Yeah, ethno-nationalist sentiments have definitely risen, but then there are other factors that'll make it more difficult for ethno-nationalists to succeed. Obviously, if we went back to the 1950s, then everyone's just default ethno-nationalists. So the modern liberal order entered in, especially in the second half of the 20th century, became super dominant, controls the institutions. So now the public is starting to kind of rubber band back to more natural sentiments as the illusion has been broken. There used to be only a few channels for news media. Everyone watched the same movies. It was all the same conditioning. And that's been broken. That monopoly has been broken. And so people are defaulting back to a more organic state. However, now we are in a culture where you'll have dissidents arrested. There are more than 1,000 people in jail in the UK for like racist posts, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's insane. If you arrested the most active 1,000 people in America, we wouldn't have, a dissident right or far right scene anymore. It would just go silent. So it only takes a little bit of political repression and persecution to curtail a rising movement. We didn't do that for the left when they were rising to power. Some people wanted to, like McCarthy, right? We should prosecute the communists as traitors to our principles. But then we didn't. There wasn't that kind of like aggressive stance on this shift. And so the right just tolerated it. The conservatives tolerated it. The left, ironically, of course, is not tolerant at all. And as long as that's the case, it's going to be difficult for someone like Rupert Lowe to ascend. There has to be a certain, like, the ideas can't be persecuted. People can. And so the ideas have to disseminate to such an extent that they are simply spreading word of mouth among ordinary people. But then again, like, I guess fewer people go to the pub than they used to, right? More people spend more time at home. And if everyone's getting their media online, Well, currently it's a more open internet than we had available, 30 years ago in terms of media space. But there's also ways in which the internet is becoming increasingly manipulated, and algorithms and AIs are getting more sophisticated. And like, when you go on X, you don't really get the updates you would like to get about the Iran war. And that's by design. And yeah, certain perspectives can be amplified. I do think there's a natural advantage of the more ethno-nationalist position because it's the default state and because the actual consistent arguments lead to that. So a certain type of high IQ white person who's open-minded will gravitate towards these. So you can't stamp out the ideas entirely. It's really a matter, again, of like intensity and volume. If the state represses enough people fast enough, then you never gain the momentum you need. And something like Restore Britain can't get off the ground because you don't have on the ground activists and campaigners to support it. But with the Iran war, actually, a lot of this calculus changes because it's no longer just about like, do we want equality? And that's something that people find very naturally, like people are naturally drawn to. Women naturally value equality because it's the ethos of being a mom. Treat all your children equally, give to those who need the most, not like to those who have the most, add on more, which is more the masculine hierarchical instinct. Women naturally gravitate towards equality, and simps naturally gravitate towards equality because that's what women gravitate towards.
Yep.
But this isn't that. This isn't like that context of the 90s where equalitarianism was, running against conservative values and that favored them. It's supremacy of a foreign group that's getting us involved or trying to get us involved in their war for their interests at the cost of our lives and billions of dollars. And that's so it hits people so viscerally and it hits people economically. And so depending on how the Iran war goes, that could open up the possibility of total, restoration in multiple countries. And I wouldn't pretend to be able to predict what happens there. It really depends on how these various states respond. And it would be such a shame if these structures displayed savvy and intelligence when dealing with their dissidents and ruthlessness with us, but then total incompetence when dealing with this country that we're now apparently at war with. You guys aren't yet, I guess, but it looks like you're trying to get yourselves insinuated in it. So, if their behavior is consistent, because it looks like the Iran war will be a disaster, is currently a disaster, that should indicate that our leadership is retarded. Now, if that's just how they are completely, we should have no problem defeating them. However, it wouldn't surprise me somehow if they display themselves to be hyper competent in suppressing us and then hyper incompetent in attacking Iran.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is it. This is the biggest wake up call, I think. And a lot of women too. When all the stuff was going on with Gaza, like you say, their heart naturally went out to these people. So then, when you notice the US and the UK funding Israel for everything that they're doing, getting involved in all these endless wars, despite Trump saying he was, not going to do anything and all the rest of it, this should be the biggest alarm bell that, okay, yeah, something's wrong. Who were the people spearheading a lot of the immigration? The biggest factor, from what I can see, is a lot of these rabbi groups, the Jewish groups, who are really trying to push open borders. And so then, even for women, okay, if they're realizing that, okay, Israel isn't on their side, surely you need to take it back to what was going on behind the scenes before that. And although they have this natural care for immigrants, when you realize the situation for what it is, of basically an attack on these countries, you should be able to decisively say, like, okay, this isn't for the greater good. It's not even for their greater good too, as in the immigrants coming in. Most people who come in, they don't end up being happy anyway. So it's a lose-lose situation. What was it? Oh, and also, I don't know, I feel at this time, I feel that because all of the news of we're becoming minorities, it's going to happen in 2060 in the UK. I think for you guys, what's even sooner, isn't it?
Yeah, 2040s.
Right.
Although
So
I think it's probably a lot sooner than that because the number of undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants is way higher than we think.
So if ever, like, it's just switching on this natural instinct with so many people, and if ever there was a good chance for someone like Rupert Lowe to come in, even though a lot of people don't fully trust that, is he legit or is he paid opposition? Who knows? But if there was ever a chance for someone like this to get in, I feel like this is that moment, because the longer that we wait, the smaller our numbers are going to get. So.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's sort of my logic for starting Return to the Land now rather than, we have to take power first and then we can do our own thing. It's like we kind of have as much power as we're likely to have in the near future, actually. And especially now, like with, again, the Iran war, the Republican Party is self-immolating. There's no way they win the midterms. There's no way they win future elections for quite a while unless there's a total regime change in the Republican Party. Like a figure like Lowe would have to come to the fore, and that's, I think, less likely in our case than it is in yours. It's like I've recently, even today, I was thinking, like, in light of current events, the best case scenario for the U.S. might just be like secession and we break apart, and part of it is conservative. And I've been open to that happening. It's like I could see how that could benefit us, but in general, I've always been more in favor of we need a strong America in this world as it is, because there's a strong China, there's a strong Russia, and do we want to cede that kind of control? And now, maybe we do. I don't know. Maybe we have to think more locally. There's really this war is not helping our prospects of pushing back against the civil rights regime. That's what I mostly cared about. I voted for Trump knowing he might go to war with Iran. I didn't expect him to do it in such a blatantly incompetent manner. They would create such a pushback that it'll destroy all of their political capital. And I didn't expect him to do it in his first, before the midterms. Obviously shooting himself in the foot for, the next 2 years, so that they won't be able to pass anything. Even if they shift their rhetoric and they become all for, we have to undo discrimination against whites, even if it became explicitly white national, that would almost be worse now, because now people hate them and associate them with white supremacy. They already do. The left does. They consider Donald Trump a white supremacist. They consider, the Epstein files. They think of that as like white pedophilia. This war they're thinking of as white supremacy. And so it's sort of just giving us a really bad name. And now when we argue for our right to be left alone in our own communities, a big faction on the left is going to say, no, that's just white supremacy and we need to totally undo it and eradicate it. So Trump's not doing us any favors. However, I don't know, maybe there's some kind of coalition, a left-right coalition, because the left is also paid off by Israel. And if that can be conspicuous to people, then we can have an anti-establishment, not a party, but anti-establishment Democrats, anti-establishment Republicans that learn how to work together. We might need Joe Rogan to run for president, actually. That could possibly work. And he has all these centrists in his cabinet. That's probably it's sad to say, but that's probably the best case scenario if America stays together.
It's just getting more and more mental, isn't it? And yeah. I mean, I enjoyed the talk that you did with Blackpilled, and you and him are just talking about like this idea, like, and this is really the best time we could have to collectivize. But I'm thinking, talking about internally migrating somewhere, like, would it be possible just to have one state, Or I think you suggested the idea of, migrating to somewhere like Ireland, where it's not too overrun so far anyway. Like, the thing is, I'm thinking of that too. So I just know that there are so many people on that wavelength. But it's how do we
should join the Woodlander Initiative.
I looked into it after you said about it, because I was thinking, because we have such strong discrimination laws. And actually, it was you who said about Mark Collette. So when I was speaking to him, he tried to set up and this is where England really does have the edge over you guys. We are the indigenous population, right? With you guys, the left will always throw out the argument, oh, there's no illegals on stolen land and all this shit, right? Even though you guys undoubtedly made the America what it is today, right? But still, we can get around that. We are literally the native population. So Mark Collette, he tried to set up a charity specifically for the indigenous people who are going through financial troubles. And instantly he's thrown back and he said, like, if you even try to do that again, you're going to get sued, you're going to get all these things. But any minority, there are so many minorities in England who can have these charities. Yet we're meant to have this, discrimination laws that protect it, right? Yeah. And so I was wondering, how did Woodlander actually achieve that? And I see on the website, he's been very vague with the wording and stuff like this. So I think that's kind of how in fact, I'm trying to, hopefully I can talk to the guy to try and figure out how it's done and how that moves forward into the future. Because yeah, I feel this is the time where we need to start collectivizing, and people are feeling it too. People really are like wanting to do these communities, just like what you're doing over there.
Yeah, we either act now in a way that gives us the moral high ground, or just get discouraged into inaction. There's no clear middle ground. I can see the argument that you need to take power from the top down in order to be allowed to exist as independent communities. But really, it has to be both, because if we don't change our lifestyles and don't live up to our values and just say we need to control the system, again, that we don't have a position of moral legitimacy because we aren't the source of change. We're not willing to sacrifice. We want somebody else to come in and do everything for us. And then that also feeds into the whole white supremacist narrative. Like, creating our own communities is just actual equality. It's actual tolerance. It's actual diversity. So it should feed into all the left's talking points. And when I engage with the reporters, I know they're two-faced and they're going to edit it deceptively, but the conversations all go the same way. They reach a dead end where they realize, like, if they hold their own belief system consistently, they should allow what I'm doing. They should want what I'm doing to exist for all peoples. So I do think this approach has more moral standing intrinsically than something like Restore Britain. If it takes a more overtly nationalist, ethno-nationalist tone, it's already gotten pretty close, but he's not been explicit about, if you're brown, you're out. He's being a little bit more diplomatic than that. But if anyone does go so far, then they'll lose that moral legitimacy. So again, you can't have a hard right or far right revolution that is going to give you what you want. The best I think that's possible is you're going to get a more moderate conservative reformation or revolution where they will no longer persecute groups like us. And even that is kind of unlikely. So we just don't have the leadership. We don't have the quality of people that we need, which is why I tend to think it's probably not going to resolve that neatly. I hope he does, but I don't really expect Rupert Lowe to win. I really hope he does, but I doubt it. And then that's going to leave us in a position where we have to rebuild our cultures from our own communities, take responsibility for ourselves, self-govern, And if that means like at a certain point we're gonna have to flee our countries and like we're all moving to Argentina for a while, it might even come to that. It's like it's not out of the question. And I always bring up the example, obviously, of the Jews, where they lost their state, they were in diaspora, but they kept their communities, they kept their church, synagogues, and their schools, and kept corresponding and built up. Now they're the most powerful, influential group in the world, and we're never going to get even close to that if all of us are isolated in our daily grinds, prioritizing, career advancement in a multicultural world. We're all serving a system that is not for us. We're strengthening that system by our participation in it. If we don't break away and do our own thing, no matter what, there's just no future for us.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the liberal arguments do kind of make me laugh, because they're more than happy to bend over backwards for like a Muslim kind of, stance, which is obviously anti-feminist, and, all these things which you'd think that they would instantly, go against, but they promote it. Rupert Lowe's the person who's most likely going to, well, his biggest opposition is Zach Polanski. Are you familiar with him?
No.
So he's the leader of the Green Party, and he's this gay Jewish man. He's super woke, super pro LGBT, pro trans, pro open borders, and he has many Muslims in his party. So naturally, so many people are thinking it's just going to be a repeat of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, right? And it's really interesting, because one of the things that he's constantly saying is his family was oppressed from the Holocaust, and when he talks, I just feel like the scariest thing for him would be to live in a 99% white country, like how England has historically always been, which, to someone like you or me, you're kind of scratching your head, like, why would that be a bad thing? Are you scared of a dramatically lower crime rate? Are you scared of having, safer societies for women and children? Are you scared everyone's going to be paying more into society than they're taking out? Everyone's speaking the same language? Like, in terms of actually stats and like tangible things, it's so hard to find an argument why you wouldn't want that, objectively speaking.
Well, if you're part of a group that has a long history of trying to subvert those countries, then it is a threat, because they have been expelled from many countries over time. Their religion is a supremacist religion. They think the nations should all serve the God of Israel, and they should follow the Jewish people as their moral guidance and political authority. So it's necessary for them to undermine, if they are good Jews, if they follow their holy book, they have to undermine the sovereignty and independence of other nations and make them dependent. And how do you do that? Well, I mean, a lot of it is they understand the consequences of moral degeneracy, because actually the Old Testament's filled with that, right? They say, sodomy is called sodomy because of Sodom and Gomorrah. And these examples, like, there will be divine punishments if these behaviors are instituted. And what's happened? Those behaviors were promoted in Weimar Germany. Those behaviors have been promoted in our societies in the last several decades. It's part of their playbook to get their ends. And so, is it intrinsically so scary for them to be in a 99% English country? Yes, because it's them, because of what they've been doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what woke me up. Like, okay, we are distinct peoples. Once you realize that, and you realize, like, this is the common mindset, and even for the Jewish people, like, I don't particularly blame them. I understand the strategy. I get why. I don't approve of the supremacy thing, but I get why they would feel threatened. I get why they would want open borders, because anti-Semitism would be a real thing. The difference is now they have a homeland, right? So, like even if they wanted to be supremacists and they wanted to control these countries, if people were switched on, it wouldn't be an outrageous thing to say, okay, you have your homelands, we have ours. But of course, it's kind of too late for that.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it is too late for that. But we all now have kind of a common enemy. So that's the other side of it. And it's scary to even envision what that involves, too. It's like, if we embrace that, well, what's the solution to that question? Right? Is it, what is it? Yeah, I mean, it's a really, this leads me to think like we're going to have some kind of global crisis, because there are so many strong tendencies, like the nature of Judaism. They're going to do what they've been trying to do for thousands of years, no matter what. The nature of this resurgent nationalism, the nature of Islam, the nature of the rise of China.
Right.
And all of that's just converging in the Middle East right now. I don't know. I've never thought that World War III was closer than it is right now. And I hope that doesn't happen. Of course, I'm glad that I live in a rural area on like a compound of like-minded people. If that is the case, I'm growing a garden. I'm going to aggressively be gardening and doing agriculture this year. I don't know. It's if you have not started a garden, I would say the takeaway from this conversation is grow some veggies. And if you can keep a goat or two, do that. Chickens.
Are you completely self-sufficient, would you say?
No, unfortunately, we're not. I mean, that's the goal, I guess, in some sense, but it's just so impractical. And we're not in fertile farmland here. The soil is very rocky. It's all clay. Any garden has to be a raised bed garden. So we can't like plow big fields and do agriculture like that. I mean, you can raise animals easily enough, but no, unfortunately. However, like this area, it is the case that there were more cows than people. So if things really went south and these, the cattle couldn't be shipped out to be sold in international markets, people here wouldn't starve. And in a lot of, the interior of the country here, like starvation wouldn't necessarily be the issue, unless, again, somehow the current power structure was hyper competent in exporting our food supply and politically repressing us, but then incompetent in waging World War III, which once again, somehow I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. This is it. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, so what do you think is in store for you for the next years? Because, the Trump and Epstein files, that's just ruined everything. Him constantly supporting Israel. I feel, I don't know who on the left would actually, be a good candidate, but I feel Trump has just done such a bad job. I don't see how it's not going to go liberal for the next 4 years. But,
yeah, it will.
Yeah. So
and then you even have like far-right dissidents in the U.S. saying they'll vote Democrat now.
Bro.
So there we are. Dude. Yeah. On that cheery note.
Well, hey, let me end it with something a bit more positive then, because I'll say this. I actually, the more I think about it, the more I think you are such a pivotal part of this whole movement. And I think so many people are waking up to the gravity of this situation. And I can't tell you how many people I know who say like, oh yeah, I'm going to, start a farm. I'm going to be self-sufficient and all the rest of it. But you're actually the first group in America to do what you're doing and unapologetically not back down. And, you made international news. So the fact that you've still stood your ground, I think this has sent out so many ripples. The same way people like Steve Laws in the UK are pushing for total remigration. Same way Thomas Selwyn in Australia is making all this noise. And now we have someone like Rupert Lowe coming forward. So what you're doing, I think, is so essential. And yeah, I don't know. I think it is creating this movement around the world.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I hope so. For me, we can't calculate in a utilitarian way what the outcome of our actions will actually be. Some people say you should play it low key and kind of deceptively enter in institutions, infiltrate, and things like that. And maybe there's a payoff there, but we don't know what the world looks like in 2 years, let alone 5 to 10, when maybe you could actually entrench yourself in existing power structures. We don't know whether these communities will be repressed or whether they'll be viable in 5 to 10 years. But we do know that it's better to live up to your values than to not live up to your values. And I tend to think if you just live consistently and honestly and speak the truth, it's going to work out. It will embolden other people to do the same. And also you can at least live or die, if that's the way it goes, with a good conscience. And, I am enough of even though I am critical of mainstream Christianity, I'm enough of a Christian that I would rather live honestly, live according to the truth, live according to my beliefs, and die because of it than live a lie. So.
Yeah, awesome. And hey, I mean, there's going to be smaller differences between us, as there is with everyone, but I very much respect what you're doing. And, for me, I can see the situation is only getting worse. So I do not mind sticking my neck out and trying to be one of these voices which are trying to promote an ethno-nationalist stance for our group, because that for me is the only light at the end of the tunnel. And like you were saying, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So you might as well do something you believe in, right?
Yeah. Do what you know is right. And I think God is just, and the chips will actually fall in our favor, again, if we live up to our principles. So, but that's easier said than done on a lot of levels.
Yeah, awesome. Eric, is there anything you want to plug? Anything that you want to push while you're here?
I mean, you can follow me on X at Aarvoll _ on YouTube. It's at Eric Orwoll. You can also just search Aarvoll and find it there. If you're interested in joining Return to the Land, we do have European members as well. If you're in the UK, I usually suggest just join the Woodlander Initiative. They are getting together. They're living up to their values. Definitely check them out. But yeah, if you're in continental Europe and you're looking for a group, we know good groups to refer you to, and also Return to the Land does have a chapter out there, so you can check us out at returntotheland.org.
Awesome. Eric, thanks very much. If you made it this far, thanks very much. It's becoming more and more clear that we really need to collectivize, which is a awkward conversation for a lot of people within England. And I know a lot of these conversations make us uncomfortable, but we also have to face the fact that the more and more immigration which comes in, this will start to change and mold the society. I mean, this is something which most people know, but still it needs to be said. Democracy doesn't work when you have open borders. A welfare state doesn't work when you have open borders. People are just going to abuse the system and change it to their will. We already know that we're going to be a minority in our own country. We are the essence of the UK. Essentially, if we're gone, then that essence is changed, and the UK as we know it today won't be the same. I just see myself as someone who wants to keep that going. And hey, like if everyone feels differently and you want something completely different, well, that's on you. But that's not the direction I want to go. It's not the direction I want to take this show. Anyway, if you are watching on YouTube, please remember to share and subscribe. It really helps me out with the algorithm. And if you're watching on Spotify, please give it a 5-star review. Again, this really helps. It really pushes the message out there. And remember to leave a comment too. I like to read all of them. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.